Hello, everybody, and happy Monday. Welcome back to The Hash. I'm Zack Seward. I'm joined by Naomi Brockwell, Ben Powers, Jen Sanasie, and Will Foxley. We are going to talk about the latest in crypto news, and we're going to start with Jen. Lead off today, Jen. What do we got?
All right. So Bitcoin's price took a blow over the weekend, hitting nearly $42,000. And the decline coincided with a series of tweets by Elon Musk, which insinuated that Tesla may sell its Bitcoin holdings worth more than $1 billion. So this morning he tweeted and said Tesla has not yet sold any Bitcoin, but the tweet in question was a response to Crypto Whale. So Crypto Whale tweeted, Bitcoiners are going to slap themselves next quarter when they find out Tesla dumped the rest of their Bitcoin holdings, to which Elon responded, indeed. So I'm just going to kick this off to the panel. Who was following the drama on the weekend?
Oh, you know it.
Yeah.
This is a good weekend for drama. This is a good weekend for drama. It's like all-time greats. I say Naomi goes first. I feel like she was really watching.
No, I say, well, I mean, I was hanging out with a bunch of friends and we were like live announcing as new things were coming up. We're like, oh my God, did you see what Peter McCormack responded to this? Oh my God, now he's talking such and such. Like it was kind of like, I mean, it feels so nerdy now that I'm saying this out loud, but we really were watching this like a live spectator sport. It's like the closest thing I get to watching sports is watching crypto Twitter. No, it's interesting because like you have Elon who's clearly just not impressed with the crypto space, right? So Peter McCormack apparently also posted a Twitter thread about Musk's criticism of Bitcoin. And then Elon responded and said, obnoxious threads like this make me want to go all in on Doge. I totally resonate with that remark. There's so much obnoxious behavior in the crypto space. It does make you want to go like, why are we doing this? You know, people are creating this free money for the world to make all these people's lives better and trying to do the best they can. And, looking to make sure people's lives are more free and all of this. And then you just have people, like the same people you're trying to help, just turn around and hate you for it. Doesn't matter what you do. Doesn't matter what tech you create that's good or it's cutting edge or it's innovating on things. People are just going to find a reason to hate it. And I hate that about the crypto space. And it doesn't surprise me that so many people rage quit. Jen, I'll throw it back to you.
Well, just speaking of that, you reminded me of yet another tweet we saw on the weekend by Billy Marcus, co-creator of Doge. So, hold on, I'm just going to pull it up here. He said that the war should rather be on scammers, jerks, liars, and the toxic crypto space and not Bitcoin versus Doge. He said that Doge and Bitcoin can work together. They can help each other out of the space. And after tweeting this, a whole bunch of haters kind of jumped into the comment section. So that just kind of points towards this toxic crypto Twitter space. But I don't know, Will, I'm passing it right down to you after that outburst there.
Well, yeah, that's hilarious because I don't think anyone's questioning if it's Bitcoin versus Doge. I think it's Bitcoin versus anything else, like Bitcoin versus like the idea of crypto working as like a project itself. Like, is Bitcoin too expensive for like numerous reasons that Elon has been pointing out over the weekend? Like, is that a viable solution for money or is it not? So it's funny, he's kind of like bring Doge into the equation, which has, that kind of started last July and it's only gathering more steam. And maybe it does turn out like the most ironic situation is what fate has for everyone. So maybe he is right. But overall, I think the weekend was just like, it was pretty intense. It was very funny. And at first I was pretty annoyed with all the takes from random people. But by the end of the weekend, it was just kind of funny to see like the two fronts against each other. And like Elon's still holding a bunch of Bitcoin, but everyone is hating on him now. It's like he has one of the largest stockpiles of Bitcoin out of anybody. But everyone thinks he's not a Bitcoiner anymore just because he had some questions that were kind of newbie-ish. But I'll give it to you, Zack.
As the great Kanye West once said, no one man should have all this power. And I don't know who gave Elon such power over the markets. It's very silly. I think it really speaks to this sort of meme economy that we currently live in which these figureheads who, storm to the front of the parade and say, I'm leading this charge. I'm the CEO of Bitcoin. I'm the CEO of Dogecoin now. And they command attention and sort of, we like that for the entertainment value. No one was taking shots at Elon Musk when, he jumped on the wagon and it rallied from 30,000 to 60,000. But now it's like, oh, okay, now we're seeing the flip side of this figurehead complex that we suffer from in this space. So, I don't know. I was extremely logged off this weekend. I didn't see any of the takes.
Good for you.
This should have been this should have been expected. I don't think the crypto community was like willing to like entertain the nuance of this conversation. But when price goes up because of prominent championship of said asset, it's like the inverse is likely to be true as well. And we've seen that over the weekend, and maybe it's just sort of a wake-up call. I got nothing more than that. I'm gonna toss it to Ben. I saw your hand went up.
Yeah, it's what do you expect? People are going to adopt this, people are not. I think it's kind of folly, and we saw this with Vitalik last week. Taking a bunch of coins he was gifted and donating them to charity. It's what'd you expect? You just gave these things to him, and so if you give somebody power and adoration and attention and all of that, they can use that however they choose. I think Twitter's a terrible venue for convincing anybody of anything, and I think that we sort of saw how ineffective it was for having conversations. On the one hand, you had tens long threads talking about trying to reason out and argue this, and then Elon being this thread annoyed me, and then you had other people being I guess we shouldn't have been mean to him about his SNL appearance. And so this is kind of the logical conclusion. I'm pretty ready to just move on from it. That battle can happen, but I don't think it has a huge underlying impact on the fates of various cryptocurrencies more generally. I think it's just some dude hopping off the bandwagon. Fine, next.
I wanted to bring up an article that was recently published on Bloomberg that asked the question, is Bitcoin the AOL or MySpace of crypto? And I wanted to get everyone's thoughts on the panel here. Ben, what do you think? Are they onto something here?
I mean, shouts to this headline, I guess. That's an interesting angle in some ways. I haven't thought about MySpace in a while. Shouts to Joe Weisenthal in that regard. So not really in my mind. I think Bitcoin does have a first mover advantage. It also has the most robust network in a variety of different ways. There's a lot to unpack here. And sort of MySpace obviously got cannibalized by its own sort of other social media companies. So I don't really see it as the same thing. But Will, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so Tracy Alloway, who's also worked with Joe on Odd Lots, wrote another piece for her newsletter comparing the AOL and Bitcoin thing together, which I'm just going to say, that's a super tired take. And that hits all the SEO points that Bloomberg wants to hit for the weekend. You got Bitcoin in there, you got Elon in there. That was a great Bloomberg piece, but that was just such a tired narrative. We've seen that AOL Bitcoin take for years now, but I'm sure a lot of Bloomberg subscribers have not ever seen that take. Just because who's reading Bloomberg, that's such an old take, and it's just very frustrating to see. There you go. That's my little. No, I'm just repping CoinDesk. Okay, CoinDesk people who are reading it, they know that take is old. So. Good piece for SEO.
Well,
that's it.
We've heard the Bitcoin obituaries for nonstop, for years now, and this article was not any different. So let's move on to something that is a little bit different. Moving back to what we started saying at the start of the show about Vitalik and his SHIB tokens that he donated. So he got billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of these SHIB tokens, and he did give some of them to charity, but apparently he's also burnt $6 billion in SHIB tokens. He says that he doesn't want the power. So this is 90% of his Shiba Inu coin holdings. It's worth about $6.7 billion. The backstory, if you didn't hear about this, a bunch of people in the SHIB community were just sending Vitalik all of these tokens, kind of like a publicity stunt. They were also trying to say well, if we send it to Vitalik, it's as good as burnt. And now he's gone and actually burnt a bunch of them. So it is interesting. He was saying that he would prefer people to send money to charity rather than send money to him. And he also said that the remaining SHIB in his wallet, he is going to send it to a charity he's not yet decided, but it does look like it's going to be in the longevity field. He's talking about preventing large-scale loss of life with a more long-term orientation. He previously, when he gave his big charity round, gave a bunch of money to the Methuselah Foundation, which is Aubrey de Grey's foundation, looking into that. So it'll be interesting to see what he does with it. But what are your thoughts on the SHIB token, the bump in price we saw as a result of this, all of this community? It's I don't know, I find it super interesting. Well, I'm going to throw this to you.
Yeah, I'll go real quick before Zach. I just want to say, I think Vitalik is in a very unenviable position, just as one of the most central figureheads of all of crypto. Yes, he is super rich, but at the same time, he just gets so much hatred for being in his position, and anything he does is extremely scrutinized. At first, he donated a lot of these tokens, and people got mad at him for donating profits from traders without asking their consent. And then he burned some of the tokens, and now people are mad that he boosted the price of the SHIB token for burning half of the supply. So there's a no-win situation. If he holds the tokens, people are going to be mad for him supporting this project just by, kind of holding the token itself, not doing anything. So I think it's interesting to look at Vitalik and kind of see him as a proxy for Satoshi or anyone else in like the tech world, like really high up, not in a great position. Everything they do is scrutinized. And I wouldn't want to be that person. So I guess shout out to Vitalik for kind of dealing with all the hatred he got this weekend.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Shiba Inu pretty flat on the news, which was kind of interesting. It's like deflationary mechanism introduced to this Dogecoin knockoff project. So interesting that may be the long-term repercussion here. But again, I'm just fascinated by this story as like a case study of an open financial system, right? So Vitalik's addresses are out there. People send him whatever he wants against his consent in this instance, as he shared in his note, right? So the idea of consent here on these networks, I think, becomes kind of interesting. Like, to whom can I airdrop my useless token that may or may not be worth something going forward? Will that be encoded into the blockchain in some capacity going forward? Will rules sort of around consent become something that this sector grapples with? So some of the bigger implications of here, just even beyond sort of the Shiba Inu tokens ups and downs, I think is kind of interesting to me as we figure out, wow, these public networks are quite strange. But yeah, back to you, Naomi.
Yeah, I'll just tag along with what you were saying, Zach, about this idea of consent, because it's super interesting because we do have things like blacklisted addresses now. We do have governments scrutinizing certain people. And you also, if you have a public address, don't have any control over people sending you money, right? So, if anyone wants to send money to your account, if bad people want to send money to your account, they could send it and suddenly you're scrutinized by the government. So it's like this very interesting system. I know that's why a lot of nonprofits actually go through proxies so that they can't just have anyone donate to them. It's just like, I don't know. I love the openness of this system. I love that it's a push system rather than a pull system. You can't just take money out of people's accounts, but you can put money into any of them. I think that's the way that it should be. And I love that about crypto. But it's just a super interesting shift in the way we do things.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting, particularly like talking about Musk just off the back of this, like as a way to try and give up power within the system and recognize what some of the benefits of it are, and like recognize that, he doesn't want to be a central point of failure or something like this, and trying to find a use case and a value for these tokens that he was sort of, were unceremoniously dumped on him because Shiba Inu just wanted it for a marketing ploy to like be like, look, like he's holding this. So I think this is maybe the flip side of how Musk just kind of seems to like tweet off, and like people really closely scrutinize that, whereas Vitalik's actively trying to say like, hey, like I don't want this, like take this away from me. And it seems like he's way more focused on this kind of long-term mission and developing a substantive conversation around these issues. So that to me was kind of combined with our previous story, the interesting note here.
All right, Hash fam, let's take a break. We're going to kick it to break. And when we get back, we're going to talk about an interesting lawsuit against Dapper Labs, the creators of NBA Top Shot. Are Top Shot moments actually unregistered securities? We'll talk about it after the break. Stick with us.
We are witnessing the greatest paradigm shift in finance in modern history. Join thousands of newsmakers and influencers talking the future of money at Consensus by CoinDesk. A live virtual experience of leaders, changemakers, virtual reality meetups, keynotes from Ray Dalio, Gary Vaynerchuk, and much more. Get an up-close look at the boom in crypto, the surge of institutional investment in Bitcoin, NFT mania, the breakneck innovation in decentralized finance, and the coming disruption from central bank digital currencies. Join us May 24th to May 27th for Consensus by CoinDesk.
And welcome back to the Hash. So we're going to talk about crypto mining here, not in the same case that Elon Musk has been tweeting about it all weekend, but for another token called Chia. Chia is a proof of space and time token that launched earlier last year and has been driving up the cost of hard drives in Asia by up to 60%. So how Chia works is that you use a hard drive or a similar device and you allow it to store data and other information on the hard drive, and acts as the kind of like a proof of capital for being invested in the ecosystem. And then they reward you equally with Chia tokens. So this has been kind of booming in the Asian sector, and prices of hard drives, like I said, are going up through the moon, and it's causing some disgruntled people or some disgruntled figures out in Asia saying, hey, we shouldn't be doing this. The Communist Party of China has even gone as far to say that it's a waste of resources. So we kind of see that all over the place. There's been some critiques of the supply side of any sort of cryptocurrency token. So I want to flip this right over to Ben, your take on Chia, what's going on with all this and Bitcoin mining?
Yeah, I mean, like Chia picked a heck of a time to get into the market with their sort of like green environmental pitch. I think, that's kind of what's been driving a lot of these headlines or these larger conversations about energy and cryptocurrencies. I mean, kind of, if we're talking about comparative energy use, like Will, I were talking about like all these various consensus kind of mechanisms. And it's really interesting to see like how these are being developed and how alternative ones are being envisioned from like proof of stake to proof of work to how those things transition, particularly on decentralized networks. So that's the larger narrative I see here is like people exploring all these alternatives. On the short term, like, look, like, sure, like, this is supposed to be the green version of mining in some ways, at least that's their pitch, but yet hard drives like take raw materials to be created. They have their own supply chains, like everything has supply chains. I mean, I'm quite tired of this narrative in some ways because I think the inherent presumption of it is like no cryptocurrency has any value at all and all these things are extraneous, right? And so like this is just more on that, and I think the framing of it is incorrect, but it's something we're going to continue to see until what feels like, there's A, more data on all of this, and then B, too, like there has to be some shift in like the messaging and like kind of articulation battle around some of this, because right now it just feels so tired and it feels like one that we've been having for, months at this point, and it doesn't feel like there's getting any traction made on either side. So that's sort of my large thoughts here. But Naomi, what have you got?
Well, I'll throw it to Jen first, and then I give my thoughts.
Well, mine is just a quick question for Will. Will, with this narrative about Chia being kind of a greener alternative to Bitcoin, why is the uptake happening kind of predominantly in Asia?
Oof, good question. I think a lot of these newer coins kind of launched there first. I think that Asian sectors just traditionally kind of move quicker on a lot of these cryptocurrencies itself. I think you see that with Binance just kind of exploding over the last year. And then it's also kind of common for the Asian sectors just to have lower costs for a lot of raw materials. Like a lot of the components for making hard drives are sourced first in China. They're not sourced in Western countries. We just don't have those facilities. So if you want to get into it, it's cheaper to do it there, and then kind of slowly moves over to North America and Europe.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I wanted to add on to what Ben, you were saying, because you talked about this in an article you did on Earth Day, where you're kind of saying like, everything uses electricity, and, we should stop saying that we should cut out this entire sector because it's like, it's wasteful and it's not contributing anything. Obviously, we realize all the value that cryptocurrency contributes. So this idea that it's not worth any electricity is like ridiculous. I also want to add on to the point, in terms of talking about supply chain and shortages and all of that, I read this interesting thread between Vitalik and Zuko, where they were talking about mining chips and just, the battles that are going on in China for dominance and, the role that Bitmain plays in this kind of shadowy underground world of like control over these things that are so heavily sought after. And Vitalik actually asked, so is Zcash going to be moving to proof of stake? And then you had Zuko responding like, oh, well, we're going to see how your thing works out first. But it is interesting that people are starting to look at that and wondering about this potential transition. And I too am interested to see how Ethereum does it. But let's change track here. Ben, what have we got next?
Yeah, so we're talking about power in some ways. Dapper Labs, maker of NBA Top Shots, is being sued by somebody over the fact and claiming that, Top Shots are basically unregistered securities because they increase in value as the company itself increases in value. Now, there are a few different complaints that are involved in this, but there's also claims that withdrawing funds takes months on end, and that the Dapper is sort of allegedly holding that money kind of in their coffers to prop up the valuation of their company, which is now valued at, I believe, $7.5 billion. So this was interesting to me. It's not particularly surprising. We see a lot of lawsuits play out around securities more generally. But I also was just kind of I was curious about the fact that this is seemingly kind of coming at Dapper for being a centralized platform. In a sense, it's like, what do you expect? Like, and I wonder if we're going to see maybe more lawsuits around like ideas of centralization versus decentralization. But Naomi, I want to hear your thoughts on this whole securities notion.
This is like the dumbest lawsuit in the world. This stuff drives me batty. It drives me batty. It's like such a money grab. You know, as a result, the plaintiff is seeking damages with respect to moments purchased since the platform's launch. It's like, they're just a money grab. Like, you know, after this complaint, the SEC is probably going to launch an investigation into it. Maybe then they'll go and launch an investigation into Magic the Gathering cards and Beanie Babies as well. They're clearly securities because, you know, the value of it goes up with the value of the project and the success of the project. Like, this person is clearly like, well, I've been damaged because, you know, I didn't realize this was an unregistered security and I put money into it and the value's gone up because Dapper Labs has gone up. So I'm suing for damages because I want even more money from this project that's gone up in value. Like, the whole thing, I mean, the space is filled with this. You see people going after all these projects, just trying to get a piece of the action. You saw it out against the Tezos Foundation. That was such a tragedy because they had amazing cutting edge technology. Their hands ended up getting tied for years while they had to figure out this lawsuit, which they ended up, you know, settling anyway. And the people would have gotten a lot more money if they just held on to their Tezos rather than try to seek damages. Like, I don't know. I look at the people who do this as blood-sucking vultures. I really do not respect people who are doing lawsuits like this. I think it's ridiculous. But maybe someone else has a different take, and I would be interested in hearing it.
I think the securities question is really interesting. So here's from the complaint itself. NBA Top Shot moments are securities because they constitute an investment of money in a common enterprise with a reasonable expectation of profits to be derived from the efforts of others. And so that was end quote. So that is citing past case law. But it really shows that definition could be applied to a lot of stuff. And I think what this law firm is seeking to do in this case is find some clarity, establish some precedent around what is and is not a security in the digital asset space. Again, like the Beanie Babies. Is my investment in a Beanie Baby, is that incumbent on someone else's effort? You know, maybe there's like a Beanie Baby like meme generator guy out there, sort of in this sort of like memization of financial products. It's really hard to tell like whose effort is what and like which can be construed as being reminiscent of what is a security and what is not. So hopefully this sort of advances the understanding of it. It does seem kind of like an odd lawsuit at first glance because it does sort of conflate some multiple things, but should it establish clarity on what is and is not a security in the digital asset space, as Ripple and XRP gets sorted out? I think that would be hugely beneficial to the environment writ large, but I'm not holding my breath that that's going to happen anytime soon. Naomi, what do you got?
Yeah, I just want to add to that because we've talked on the show before about the library lawsuit, and I raised the question in that and said, like, is this the end of crypto? Like, it's the same precedent. They were arguing in that lawsuit because the value is derived from the efforts of others, and because when you put this on the open marketplace, the value is reflective of the value of Library Inc. and all of that. You know, they're drawing all these conclusions saying, well, because of that, it's a security. And we said at the time, we were like, this could be applied to like every crypto. You know, this is almost the entire space minus a few projects out there. So, you know, if this does set a precedent, then this is really damaging for the crypto space. This is not a good thing. They're basically saying that something that has value on the open market is a security, which is ridiculous. It's the laws of supply and demand. It's just, you know, people.
I think a precedent would be helpful, though. That's the thing, like, right? Like, this is such a broad space. No, absolutely. But I think just getting a say like one way or another helps give some clarity around this really broad definition that we're talking about, which is like, you know, what is value? Like essentially kind of asking that writ large. And I think that, you know, small decisions, and I'm a little bit skeptical, you know, how far this case could go. I think they're kind of taking shots at Dapper because Dapper is has such a high valuation. But I think like clarity in all instances, particularly from regulatory bodies, like sort of lays out the next level of the battlefield in looking at those and reporting on them and understanding them. And like that advancement overall, I think is beneficial because it's questions we're going to have to answer one way or another, like eventually, you know, maybe this just pushes a timeline. But Zach, take us away to the next story.
Let's go from Dapper to Zapper. All right, we're talking about a funding round for Zapper, a $15 million funding round. Zapper is this DeFi dashboard that visualizes sort of like where your token holdings are, how much they're worth in value, and it also gives you some additional functionality to like yield farm those tokens or to swap those tokens. So it's a bit like your control panel, but also like an aggregator of various DeFi services. So they raised $15 million, led by a prominent DeFi investment fund known as Framework Ventures. Mark Cuban was involved. Ashton Kutcher's fund was involved. So I think this, to me, the bigger picture here is potentially about sort of like DeFi usability, and maybe we're at sort of the beginning of this next chapter of DeFi usability as Zapper and other platforms look to turn things that exist in the context of long strings of characters and Ethereum wallet addresses into something that average investors can look at, understand, and act upon. I'm going to throw this to Will to stay sort of again at the big picture beyond just the funding round itself. Talking about like DeFi UX, is this likely to be an advancement in that arena, or are we still ways off from this clicking with most investors?
I think there's been a lot of different projects that have come out of the woodwork over the last 6 months that have just shown tremendous strides in the usability for the project. So I think Rainbow Wallet is one that's really great for iPhone. MetaMask has made a lot of improvements lately. And then, of course, Zapper is just great. It's very functional, very easy to use. And then you can touch a lot of different parts of DeFi that other wallets you wouldn't be able to even like think about or use. So it's opening up these ecosystems that before were just like very walled off by insider knowledge, so to speak. The interesting thing to me going forward is how do you monetize something like this? Ostensibly, if they're putting $15 million into this project, they're trying to get some money on the other side of it. So where does that money come out? For MetaMask, they do charge a small fee for every transaction, every time you like send a transaction on the network. And it's really, really tiny, so you won't notice it typically. But it adds up to a few $1 million quarterly, I think, for MetaMask as of right now. And if that keeps growing, then they're going to become much more profitable. So I'd expect Zapper to do a similar thing and all these other wallets to do that, where there's kind of extracting some rent for being a very good UI product on top of these open blockchains.
Yeah, I think this is a really, really important part of this whole conversation, right? Like, I cover privacy tech. It's notoriously like difficult to interact with sometimes. And Zack, we've spoken on the show about like lowering the barriers to entry and making people have easier options to access these technologies is hugely, hugely important, right? Like, it's really, really hard for the decentralized ecosystem to kind of compete with these centralized models like Apple or Google or stuff like that if you don't have a really simple way to use it. You know, if it takes you 3 hours to onboard somebody on trying to interact with a crypto interface, they're probably not going to do it, you know? And I get questions about this all the time, like, oh, like, actually, how do I do this thing? And I'm like, well, first you got to do this, then you got to go here, then you got to do all this other stuff. And even in like, for example, the kind of Dapper Labs complaint, part of the complaints was like months on end to like get a withdrawal off the site. And Zack, we were talking a little bit about this before the show, but that could be an issue around like wallets and KYC and getting that set up on the user's end, not necessarily on Dapper Labs' end. So the fact that you see those kind of complaints out there in the crypto ecosystem more generally shows that people are kind of diving in, not quite understanding what's going on. And so simplifying and streamlining that whole process, particularly around like access to DeFi, which is quite interesting and exciting in a lot of ways, is going to be really big to make this actually whole idea sustainable. But Naomi, I think I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, so I love how fast the DeFi space moves. I just love it because you have this going out, you have Shapeshift. I don't know if you guys have tried the new decentralized platform. It's awesome. It feels like old days Shapeshift. You just go on, you choose your coins you want to swap to. It's completely decentralized, and they find across the DeFi markets what has the best rates, and they give you that. You know, I love these platforms that are finding easier ways to bring all these disparate areas together, and it's so different to platforms like, we were talking the other week about Plaid, for example, how you have these walled gardens and it's notoriously difficult to get information. And so it's hard for people to innovate on these systems. But here we have DeFi where all the data is open and you have all of these, booming enterprises coming in and trying to figure out how to provide value to customers. I just think it's really, really cool and is what I love about crypto. But Jen, I'll throw it to you.
I just had a question for the panel. Do you guys think that it was mainstream investors that DeFi needed for DeFi to become more accessible? Like, we're hearing about these investors who typically kind of operate in a more mainstream world. They're now coming over to crypto. They're investing in these companies. Is this what we needed to have interfaces that are more usable?
I don't know. I think
And people
it might be like a chicken and egg
Zack.
thing, just kind of backwards. Like I feel like a project like Zapper is like a real eye opener for like the power of composability, right? You just need a wallet address. You just give it that, and then all of a sudden you have a very comprehensive picture of your financial well-being associated with that address. They don't need your name. They don't need your address. They don't need nothing. So they've come a long way in sort of making this easier, and I think to the point where they are potentially attracting that next wave of investors, which will then sort of maybe start the flywheel of user-friendly innovations going forward. So I don't think it's necessarily that the new investors are the leading indicator of this process, but maybe the lagging indicator suggesting that they're already sort of taking steps toward usability that will be useful to people going forward. I'm really interested to see what comes of this investment. There's talk of doing sort of a Shopify-esque app platform on the site and also some other functionality that could be really cool. I think that's it. Do you guys want to say anything else?
I want to add one thing. Just as we wrap up there about like mainstream. All right, I got to do it. About mainstream, if you looked at all these ridiculous DeFi platforms in 2020 before they had any usability, and they were still booming. Like people were so intent on figuring out yield farming and using this technical and complicated platforms. I mean, Wi-Fi is notoriously difficult to use. Like Y-Earn, like you have all these complicated platforms. People really brought them to the mainstream, and now the mainstream is like, oh, I need a easier user interface. It's going to bring more people, but I think the boom came from just, excited people. But Zack, let's end it.
Those are wonderful closing thoughts. That was fantastic. Thanks so much. We'll be back here tomorrow to do the hash. Go read CoinDesk.com. Till then. All right. Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.